son. Where'd you find this?
Buckle up, buttercups. It's time to get down to business. Oh, yeah. It's the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Totally legit.
Welcome back, folks. It is once again the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast, and we're here joined again today by internet researcher Doireann Herold, who's going to tell us about another spooky mystery from the past. We're going to talk about the Voynich Manuscript.
Thank you for having me on again. I really appreciate it. I'm so glad to be back.
I'm really stoked because on the last one you kind of dropped a hint that you were working on something, and a couple of weeks ago when you told me what it was, finally, I was super stoked. For the people out there that don't know what the Voynich Manuscript is, it is this enigmatic text that has been studied for literally hundreds of years by some of the brightest minds in esotericism, alchemy, and now up to today, like translators and people who are really trying to interpret the past professionally, and no one has figured it out. It's looked as like this really cool example of cryptography. It's got these crazy illustrations, and it's just captivated people for hundreds of years. Now, this thing is currently at Yale, and there's been kind of a resurgence in people's interest and trying to get to the bottom of this thing. And that is where you step in. So you go from decoding the actual history of Stonehenge and sacred sites to like pretty seamlessly transitioning into this thing. And there's like a bunch of interesting stuff from your life that kind of like pre-positions you to be doing what you're doing right now. So why don't you just tell us about how you get involved in looking into this thing and the strange sequence of events that get you to start cracking the code.
Absolutely. So in this past year, I was unemployed for a fair amount of it. I took on some contract work relatively recently, and I currently work at a pizza shop part-time. I worked in tech previously, but as you may know, the tech job market has been kind of difficult to navigate. So this past year, I've been unemployed for a fair amount of it. I am a software engineer by trade, and previously I worked in hospitality in the arts. And when I went to college, I went for writing and translation. I translated from French to English. I translated A Season in Hell by Rimbaud. But I did not graduate. I went for 3 years, and due to finances and life complications, I did not finish. So I have, a background in language and the arts, and when I'll tell you a little bit more about my language history as we get into the podcast. But yeah, so I was doing a bunch of archaeological research and deep dives in terms of archaeological structural mysteries, and a lot of my findings and my work is about situating these mysteries in sort of a human, realistic and reasonable way, to think about, what is the most reasonable reason why these structures are so large and exist, and what were they used for. So my approach is very based in logic. One of my slogans is, about logical conclusions. So I've had a lot of fun doing all of this research and these deep dives. I use research using Google Scholar and JSTOR. So I'm sifting through so many university publications and journals in my research, and it gives me a really broad overview of the studies of these archaeological mysteries. And so the Voynich Manuscript I had previously heard about, but I hadn't done that much research into, and it came up in my research of archaeological mysteries. And I noticed that it was located in the Voynich, which is my hometown. I'm from New Haven, so I decided to. It definitely motivated me to look into it
Too
further.
close to ignore. Yeah.
Exactly. And so to give you a little bit of an overview of the Voynich Manuscript, this will be relatively brief, and I definitely encourage you to go online and do a deeper dive. There's a lot of contextual information that I won't necessarily be giving, but just to give you an overview, it was carbon dated. The vellum in the Voynich Manuscript was carbon dated to between 1404 and 1438. It's a handwritten illustrated codex. They're not sure what the language is, or if it is a language. There has been speculation that it might be a hoax. It has been studied by so many different people over the 600 years that it has existed. And it's indicated that it was composed in Italy during the Italian Renaissance. So the origins, authorship, and purpose of the manuscript is still unknown and debated. And so there are a lot of different ways that you can approach this text. My approach is very linguistic. So because I have a background in translation, I was primarily looking at the text, the script, and the actual art of translating it. And translation is an art form in itself, but in terms of my approach, I took very little liberties in actually translating it. So to give you an idea of what it looks like, in case you're not watching the podcast, in case you're listening, it's sort of like a beige, yellowish parchment paper. It looks like parchment paper, and it's written pretty neatly, but it looks like, like a informal script of handwriting. I immediately thought it was Latin adjacent, or Irish, and I'm Irish, so that's what I immediately thought when I looked at the script. And there are images in the cipher. So there's an herbal section, like a floral herbal section. There's a section that's astrological. There's a section that is considered like the stars section, where there's stars. There's also a food section, and there's a section that's called the natal section, and it's a bunch of pregnant women, naked pregnant women. So just to give you an idea of what it looks like, there are a few different colors. The inks that were tested were not super expensive, so it potentially wasn't like royalty that had written this manuscript.
They would have been readily available. Yeah.
They were readily available in Italy. And they're just exquisite. And a lot of the plants, they can't really identify as being one plant or the other. And they're kind of, there's people have said that they're kind of psychedelic or imaginary drawings. And so that's why also there's quite a bit of mystery. The cipher attracts artists, attracts writers, attracts mathematicians and engineers. It attracts all sorts of different people because there's just so much mystery to it, and it's really quite a beautiful looking text as well. Yeah.
If you could just maybe to explain in general, like what when you're translating anything, like what are things you have to keep in mind just before you start at all? What are some things that you have to keep in mind for like how you approach decoding this possibly old language that nobody knows that well anymore?
Sure. So one thing to keep in mind when you don't know the language of origin is to look for patterns that are consistent with linguistics. So that's actually one of the criteria. One of the criteria for demonstrating a translation of an unknown script. I reached out to also, just to give you a quick background of the Voynich Manuscript. It's 240 pages, so it's around 116 back both sides. And just to give you an idea of like the time period and how many hands had it, there is a confirmed owner, Baresh, who is a 17th century alchemist from Prague. He had it prior to Voynich. Wilfrid Voynich was a Polish book dealer who purchased it in 1912. Just to give you an idea of the hands that had it. And
the
then
provenance, yeah,
exactly. And then in 1969, it's been held at the Voynich, and it switched over hands. It was donated. Nobody wanted to buy it, so that's just something to keep in mind. And prior to that, there are some blocks where we don't know who had it. We're not exactly sure how it got to Prague to begin with from Italy. So that's just to give you a quick background, just a few things that I left out. And so to demonstrate an arguable translation of an unknown text, you need several requirements or criteria. So I reached out to, after speaking to a rare books dealer, I gave him an excerpt of one of my translations, and he suggested that I reach out to Lisa Davis Fagan, who's one of the lead medieval studies professors at Yale and at the Voynich. And so Lisa Fagan responded with a list of criteria. And there are six criteria for an arguable demonstration of an unknown text. It must be consistent with the facts in terms of the date of the parchment, specifically with the manuscript, with its history. And then number 2 is it must be verifiable and repeatable by others. Number 3, it must be evidence-based and not based on hunches, guesses, or assumptions. Number 4, it must be consistent with linguistic evidence. So that's sort of what I talked about in terms of linguistic consistencies between languages. There are several mathematical approaches to understanding, the amount of words and characters that exist in a language, for example. She lists examples for the manuscript that are specific. There are distinctions between 2 languages in the manuscript, so that has to be taken into account, as well as character level entropy and word level entropy that exists, that is distinct with the Voynich. So those 2 entropies I'll be going over a little later.
Sure.
And they're super specific to the manuscript. So she said, for this manuscript, that has to be taken into account. Number 5, she said it must be original. There are literally hundreds of solutions, and they've been tried and rejected. I've seen a few of these, but in my research and in my approach to the translation, I steered clear of a lot of that sort of research because I didn't want someone...
Yeah.
Exactly. I didn't want someone else's approach or opinion to influence my direction. And I was luckily able to go in sort of the right direction pretty early on. So I did not really look into that many people's theories when I was in the process. It was after the fact, after I was deep into transcribing and translation, that I started to look at other people's theories to see if I was the only one. And I hadn't seen my theory anywhere. So number 6, it must result in plain text that makes sense. So with my research and with my translation, I believe that it meets all of these criteria. So I can start sharing my screen maybe.
Yeah, sure. Kick it off.
So this is the lovely manuscript. You can see it's pretty worn. There are consistencies in terms of the styling. You'll see occasionally these larger letters here at the start of paragraphs. These are the plant and floral. This is the plant and floral section. It's really, really gorgeous. And the script, let's take a zoom in. This is sort of what it looks like.
Super
in terms
cool.
of, exactly, yeah, it's beautiful. And it's consistent in terms of mathematical approaches that have been used to examine the text. It is consistent with other languages. There are slight distinct variations, but it does appear to be, even to the professionals, like it is some sort of language. Some people believed that it was a created language, like a make-believe language or codex.
I mean,
and that's how a lot of
it looks like a fairy tome. In like
exactly. So I initially thought.
Way.
Right. So when I originally saw it, I thought it looks potentially like Latin, definitely medieval vibes. But I remembered two different plaques that I had seen in the past. One was an Ogham plaque, which is like proto Irish, and it's just lines. They're just lines, basically. And then the other plaque that I saw was actually in New Haven at a bar called Fergie's Bar. And I used to go for trivia with my friends there. And there was a plaque behind the bar that's written in Old Irish that you've probably seen before. But I immediately went there. I said, this looks like it could be Irish.
Oh, yeah, totally. I just pulled up a couple pictures of Old Irish text and Ogham.
Right. Yeah. And people have seen that, and like, yeah, like Lord of the Rings lore, etc.
Yeah,
and so this
for
is
sure. Yeah.
What makes the text interesting also is that this is the astrological sort of section, and it's Lisa Fagan in one of her lectures. She talks about some of these being potentially constellations because of the stars. So.
Sure.
Like the formation of the stars here, she thought that maybe some of these could be constellation names.
Processionals of solar bodies. Yeah.
Right. And then we have like astrological symbols, like this is a symbol for Pisces. And then, yeah, again, these little naked people in tubes. And yeah, this is like the goat symbol. I don't know exactly.
The ram. Yeah. Aries.
Yeah, that's Aries. Right. And so we have these little pregnant women. So this is a stars section. These are stars. So this is considered a stars section, even though there's some natal qualities. But this is where the natal section starts, and it's some of it is quite verbose, and these are the naked women. Okay, so and then the end bit is very, very verbose. And I have not translated all of this yet. This is time. This is a lot of. It takes quite a bit of time.
Dense. Yeah, that's real.
I just also want to say, in terms of my approach, for the translations that I'm working on, I do not use AI whatsoever. I did not use AI for my approach much at all. I know like AI does exist in some search engines. I use DuckDuckGo now though. So I steer clear of AI. And the reason why I do that is because AI cannot figure this out. We know that just from like people talking about it, that they've used AI to figure this out, and AI has failed. There's also a quality of this that is just so human, and I wanted to really respect that. I'm also not the biggest fan of AI. I'm not a huge fan, even though I'm a software engineer. I'm not a huge fan.
I think it goes back to even your other interests. Like you're more concerned in the human approach. You know, these cultures didn't have computers, and if they were able to figure it out without computers, we should be able to figure it out without computers too. You know, computers are a nice aid, but they shouldn't be the answer to everything, especially with stuff like this. So I just now that we're looking at it, I just wanted to break a couple things down. So not much is known about this book, but what you were talking about before, there's ways that they can test certain things about this book to get finite answers. One of the things you were talking about was the carbon dating of pages. Mm-hmm. That is material. That's material that can be dated because it's organic material that is aged. So we can be pretty confident that the age of this thing is correct as long as the methods of measurement were correct. And location,
and location. So
and ink for the same reason.
Exactly. Yep. So Italy, thank you so much for saying that. So let's zoom in on Italy, because that's exactly where I went in terms of my process. I was thinking, what sort of ancient medieval texts existed in Italy in that time, and was anyone in that area or time period speaking Irish in Italy? I was pretty convinced early on that this was Latin adjacent or Irish, so I started looking at old texts that are older syntactical medieval texts. So I looked at to see if anyone was speaking Irish in Italy, and if you can imagine the map geographically of Italy, the boot. So imagine like sort of like a rainbow shape above the boot, like northeast and northwest of the boot. There's sort of a strip area where Irish or Gaulish immigrants lived, and they were the minority, and they spoke Cisalpine Celtic, which is a variation of Irish. And at this time, Irish existed as it was considered early modern Irish. And in terms of modern Irish, if you don't know, Irish is a pretty dwindling language, just due to the level of colonization that happened over hundreds of years in Ireland. So the language is not widely spoken. And during this time, I believe it was more widely spoken, but Gaulish immigrants lived and spoke Cisalpine Celtic in that area, and it's very close to the Venetian territory of Italy as well, near the Swiss Alps, etc. But I looked into, all right, what did Cisalpine Celtic look like? How does it compare to modern Irish? How does it compare to a potential syntactical medieval old text? So I looked on Wikipedia. I love Wikipedia, also human-based. I'd rather have errors that are human-based than robot-based, if that makes sense. So I looked into
totally.
The Alpine Celtic language, and this will come up when you search Alpine Celtic. This is a Lepontic language, and it's considered Cisalpine Gaul area. So this is sort of like the area in which Gaulish were speaking Cisalpine Celtic, and they were likely polyglots or bilingual, just because of the location of
the proximity to other languages.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I saw this on the Wikipedia page, and I said, that looks adjacent to what we're seeing in the Voynich Manuscript. The Voynich Manuscript, So I decided to test out my theory, and I assigned letters that were as close as possible to this syntax with the cipher. So if you look up here, we have this. Look at this character, for example, or these two characters actually, and then go to contact. We have the CO here. Looks kind of similar, doesn't it? So I was like, hey, this looks like I could be onto something. Let me just start assigning and see where it goes. And I started in October of last year, just to give you a little bit of a timeline as well. And I just would start just to keep track of things, would email myself back and forth translations. And to begin with, let me pull up sort of an example of what I was doing just so you can see the process.
Yeah, no, that'd be great.
I also looked up similar text at the time, or what this would be similar to. And with my first test, I started to return modern Irish words. And so I was like, I think I'm onto something, but it was still clunky and I still wasn't exactly sure of several letters. So this is an example. This is November, just to give you an idea of, this is when I thought R's might be M's. And this is, this seemed like a religious text that was like a prayer. And it was also like very kind of bizarre, but it was because there were so many M's. And I was looking at sort of the consistencies of letters in Irish. So this is VM attempt. The translations, if you know Irish phonetically, several letters and letter combinations can sound the same. And I started to realize, oh, this might be in a more phonetic, vernacular Irish. So this is what I was sort of trying to figure out, who was the author. This was like the path that I went down. I looked up this guy, John of Ireland, who was potentially in Italy during the time. And then I looked up different book dealers as well to see if I could find out the exchange of the book. And this is just sort of like an example of like my first tests that were not really quite accurate, but I was still returning Irish words. So I was like, all right, I'm going to keep on testing this out,
enough to
figuring
keep
this out.
Yeah,
exactly. And so this took a couple different variations. In fact, like up until about a month ago, one of my letters was still slightly off. And then the more that you translate, the more that you dive into, you recognize other patterns. So when this character precedes a vowel or a constant, it will be a different character in some cases. So I'll get into sort of what I'm talking about here. So the phonetics of Irish. Let's do a little quick intro to Irish. So also for background, I am Irish, and I'm I think more than half Irish. And when I was in high school, I got the opportunity to take a language course at Yale. And I was a low income kid, and a lot of different people who did well in high school got this opportunity, and I could basically take any language that I wanted to in high school, and I chose to take Irish, and so few people decided to take Irish. It was me and 3 other girls. What was that? Did you hear that?
I'm pulling up your TikTok too, so when we get to that point. Yeah, that's my fault. But go ahead, keep going. Keep
So
going.
the Irish course that we that I decided to take was with Pat Whalen. He's a professor at Yale, or he was a professor at Yale, or an adjunct professor. And he's great. There's a great New York Times article about him, about teaching us, the very few of us. So it was myself and I think 3 other girls, and we'd go twice a week and just talk and speak in Irish. We'd read Irish poetry. And
wow.
I had an idea
complete immersion.
Right. I had an idea of the phonetics, and the phonetics are tremendously difficult to get a handle on if you're an English speaker, because, for example, I mean, you know, names like Saoirse and names like my name, Doireann, like in Ireland, it's pronounced Darren. So there's things aren't always spelled like how they sound. So MH, like the name Maeve, for example, Maeve, BH is a V sound. BH is a V sound. It's spelled MAEBH, and Siobhan, SIOBHAN. So
yeah, right.
BH and MH are V's, and EANN, IN, ANN are all the same sound. And so I started thinking, okay, what if these letter combos, are the more significant looking characters here in the Voynich? For example, the towers, these are referred to as, you know, little towers. Like this is a tower. So I was like, maybe this is a combo of letters. Maybe this is a combo. And I started looking at the frequency of endings, suffixes, and prefixes in Irish. And I determined the combos that would make most sense in terms of the actual characters and frequency and consistencies that we see here. So let me pull up my notes because I'm going a little bit off. You can still see my screen, right? So this is Lisa Fagan's requirements that she gave. That so I'll show you. So this is a research paper by 2 people that work in conjunction with the Voynich. This was published in October 27th of 2020. And this is a huge deep dive in terms of linguistics. The math part about it, I wasn't able to 100% figure out in terms of actually, I've never taken statistics, so it was a little bit tricky to figure out. But
yeah, what if you could kind of briefly explain, like, what is the concept of the entropy? Like, what is the math, just in general, not necessarily what it specifically means for this, but like, what is that?
So, it's pretty. Let me see if they have a good explanation, because I'm probably not going to say exactly what it is, but it's the occurrence of letters and or characters over time in the text that fits into an expected range for languages, and some entropy is higher or lower depending on the language. Low conditional character and entropy of the Voynich, they call it Voynichese.
Voynichese. That's ridiculous.
which is so funny, because I don't know. I'm fairly certain that this is Irish, and I feel like the research has gone all these different ways, and the fact that it's largely due to colonization is kind of sad and alarming. That's a Debbie Downer moment. But yeah.
Well, yeah, no, it is really funny that if by squashing out the Irish culture, the future West erased any ability to be able to decipher this thing and instead call it Voynichese instead of just realizing
exactly,
it's this more prosaic answer.
They're actually creating the mystery of it. They actually created the mystery of it, which is
silly. It's very silly.
So let's actually go online and find a proper definition, because so H is the entropy, is the probability that character X will appear in the text, and log 2 is base 2 logarithm. So that's sort of like the probability. I know what log 2 means in terms of software engineering, but the result is a single number representing the entropy of all text symbols. A higher entropy value indicates that the text contains more randomness or unpredictability, while a lower entropy value indicates that the text is more structured or predictable. The program can calculate a single. This is just talking about the program, but this is basically it. So if you want to splice the search part out, that would be great, and then I can just read from here. The result is a single number representing the entropy of all text symbols. So a higher entropy value indicates that the text contains more randomness or unpredictability, while a lower entropy value indicates that the text is more structured or predictable. And then if you look at this work that these two people associated with the Voynich
what did their work find?
So we are particularly interested in the metric of conditional character entropy, or second order character entropy. Conditional character entropy is a measure of the overall predictability of characters in a text. In this 1976 book on computational applications to scientific and engineering problems, Yale physicist William Bennett Jr. used a transcription of Voynichese to illustrate the concept of information entropy in language and its application to cryptography. He found that the conditional character entropy of Voynichese to be surprisingly low compared to a sample of European plain text and ciphers. This means that Voynichese characters are unusually predictable compared to most European languages. We discussed the definition of conditional character entropy, and the history of its applications to the Voynich Manuscript more thoroughly in Bowron and Lindman in 2020. Okay, so one of the criterias for defending your translation is to actually look into this specifically, this entropy, and that's what Lisa Fagan wrote in her email to me. So here is where I'm going to show you some of my own little drawings. Let's actually make this larger.
Brilliant. Yep.
Okay, so if you're familiar with the text, I'm actually going to show them side by side a little later. But
yeah, perfect.
Really common suffixes in the text look like this. The most common word that's in the text actually has this suffix. So this is sort of what I've worked out. And again, this was a lot of trial and error. And I just want to talk about, these are the vowels. So A is the O and the O is the A. And this symbol here, this is actually the reason why the character entropy is distinct with Irish. But in this specific syntactical Irish, this is the reason. This is your culprit here. This is not a character most of the time. When this precedes a vowel, it's a fada. It's an Irish fada. And I can...
So like accent.
It's an accent, exactly. So this actually accounts... I can't do all the math, but this actually accounts for that those differences which are slightly above negligible. It's because one of the characters that the Yale people looking into this, they were considering a character that's not a character the majority of the time. So this usually will be preceding a vowel, and it will be adding a fada to that vowel. If this is standing alone, it's either an A fada or an I fada when it's standing entirely alone, which is very rare, or if it's preceding a consonant. This is a fada. So all of that research is considering this to be a character when it's not. Which I was like, I can't believe that that's the case. So this is sort of a breakdown. I'm going to show you also my drawings of the, so this is an example of, this is an O fada. This is an A fada. And then let me just show you my other drawings. Actually, this is in my my notes here. It's a little bit, and I'll read from. I basically took the format of a standard research paper, even though I'm not an academic right now. I was like, I'm going to pretend I'm writing as an academic would. So this is my this is part of my defense of my own translation. Voynich Manuscript is written in the Irish with a Lepontic. Sorry, I'm just gonna remove that. Editing in real time. The Voynich Manuscript is written in Irish with a leptonic variation syntax, and this is the reason for entropy. Also, it's not just the fada that's the reason for the entropy. It's also the combination of characters. So endings and suffixes that end with INN, ANN, ENN, they're all one character. That ending is one character, and it's the G-looking character. I'll show you all the consonants in just a second. I'm just going to read through this. So
Sure.
The differences noted in the studies due to the nature of the content, the differences noted in the studies are due to the nature of the content. So in terms of word entropy, not character entropy, but word entropy, which they go over in the study, the herbal texts are long form narrative poetry, and this is the case with most of the text that's in paragraph or excerpt form. The text that is in the astrological text areas and the surrounding texts in the food-oriented and natal texts are mainly not sentence format. They're predominantly instructional or exclusively verbs and nouns. So that's why there's differences in terms of word entropy, and where they think that there's a second language. I am under the impression that there isn't a second language. It's still Irish. I'm still getting fitting Irish words that correspond directly to the images. So it may appear that they're in another language, but they're in that second language, there are fewer intrum words and pronouns and very few adjectives and numbers. They're predominantly nouns, instructions, and verbs. So in terms of the noted entropy differences in character, it can be attributed to the fact that one character is not a character and it's a fada, and some of the characters are combination. So this is sort of where I get into that. I wrote that phonetics need to be understood for some of the spellings and variations. The text is rich poetry, rich text with euphemisms and a flowing sound. So very, very poetic sounding that corresponds with the images again. I'll go into some of the actual translations in just a second. And this is an example of all of the consonants, or my handwriting is not the best, so oops. So the towers I originally, like, I had to work with the towers a lot because I originally thought they were BH. But BH, it sounds like another combo. So I'll show you. It sounds sort of like FH. So BH, I didn't really have to worry about unless it was a hard B sound, which is always with an R in Irish. So this R with a hat on top is just a BR. Everything is super logical. It's so logical. It's ridiculously logical. And if there's ever a character that infrequently shows up, you can just see what characters it's a combo of, or you can look to the Lepontic breakdown, the Lugano and Lepontic breakdown, and you're likely to find it. So I think there are a handful of very rare characters, and like a V looking one and a K looking one. Those are just on the Lepontic map. So my cat is distracting me. Okay, so this is the towers, TH, and then the half tower, the half loop, this is FH. This is sometimes variable just because FH is silent when it's at the beginning of a word. So sometimes it appears and sometimes it doesn't, but you have to look at the history of Irish. So early modern Irish will have had an FH at the beginning of something that was dropped later on, for example. But you can actually trace it with this great dictionary site that I use. This is also seen as common. Let's go at page 8, I think it is, yeah. There we go. So as I showed you before, these are just to go over the vowels just really quickly. This is the ending IL, and that is exactly what the Lepontic looks like. So where did it go? So if we look at really quickly, I, and then L, I, L. This is just curved. The L is just slightly curved. See? I, L. Yeah. It's literally exactly the same. So, a lot of these are really logical. So let's go back to the consonants really quickly. So the consonants are super logical, and they also make sound in terms of like, what does a sound like? G and k, that's going to be, g sounds is going to be pointy, right? And then something more like f, that's going to be softer and curvier. That's just how it is. So this is N, or sometimes a hard G, but most of the time N. That's a pointy sound. Which is very light and sometimes just like an H. That's going to be a C. This is going to be a curvier version of this. So there are 3 different variations of this letter in the text. And this one that's more vertical is an S, or if it's standing alone, it's a question mark, which makes sense. That's what we have now, is a question mark like that. So this is sort of a breakdown of in terms of consistencies. The 4 here, this little 4 symbol, is always followed with an O, and there's a reason for that. It's also almost always after that followed by a TH or an FH, right? And so in Irish, the letter combo that is always going to precede a TH or an FH, that's fa. So when I realized that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is I'm absolutely right with these towers. I'm absolutely right with these towers. Because the towers, I was still thinking, just because of the look, I thought this might be B. But phonetically, it sometimes is. But it's when I realized that, just in terms of consistency, that these are almost always following or preceding an FH or a TH. I was like, it is FH or TH. I'm right. And that's when I started getting really, really consistently accurate results. So let's look at my notes again. So this is the DH. And to show you why this is also DH or D, this is the phonetic IN, AN, ANN, or EANN. And this is a really common suffix in this text and in Irish in general. And then you have these things that make complete sense, right? So this tower is a TH with an R. It's literally just thra or tra. If it's a half tower, it would be thra or tra. And the same thing with this tower is just a fra because it's an R through it and an FH.
That's
there
so
are
interesting.
Isn't that? Yeah.
It's like the way it's written determines how you say it in a very interesting way.
Yeah, it's completely logical. And if you notice this, it looks like an N. This sometimes will have an N, but it's a letter combo that is basically a combo between N phonetically NDH and INN. So it's a letter combo that's all three of these here.
Interesting.
And one thing that I noticed, so it's a long. These are long endings. These are long, but they're long endings, and they're endings that are consistent with like longer words, like sort of elaborate words, like the word consistently, for example. Like there are two suffixes there back to back. So these are complex endings, and it's either AIGH or OIGH, depending on the vowels that precede it. And this one is either act or icht. And it's because it's pointy. It sounds pointy.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's got more pointy angles in it.
Yeah, it just sounds pointy. Like, I literally went into this like auditorily, like when I realized that it was Irish and there were just so many different phonetics, I knew that this is going to be most likely pretty logical, consistent with the Venetian Lepontic breakdown, Lugano-Lepontic breakdown, and I knew that it was going to, be logical and make sense visually. And I noticed also, so these are more. So this is a BR, and this is an R. This is a BR, an R. This is Fa. This, I imagine, would be Fra, but without the Fada. And then these more rare ones, let's take a look, because I don't remember off the top of my head. So let's look at this V is a U. It's a V, potentially a V. Let's look at V. The other way around. I'm not seeing it. But yeah, it could be a U without a fada, which is pretty rare.
Yeah.
You're usually going to see a U with a fada, which is it's an O or an A with the fada. I'll show you an example of what a U fada looks like. But a U without a fada is pretty, I feel like, pretty rare. So we wouldn't see these that often. This one is definitely not a Z. Z is not really in Irish, so this is incorrect. And we can see, sorry, I get like, when I see something that's like, this equals that, and it's not that thing, I'm like, no! So, and this is one of the letters that we see, at the beginning of paragraphs, but it's really rare in the Voynich. But let's see if there's anything here that looks similar to that. This TS, it does happen in Irish. Also, TN is super rare, so it could not be listed here, but it could be TN in Irish. TN is a beginning. TL is also a beginning that's rare. But yeah, these look like, and this we can know what this is based off of our ending. It would most likely be a complex ending, and it looks like a G and an F, a G and an F. So it would probably be something that's phonetically similar to a G and an F. So it looks visually like a combo of a G and an F. And there are combos that are rare in Irish, and it's likely one of those combos. This is also, just based on looking at it, I can almost guarantee that it's always going to be at the end of a word and be similar to those AIGH oct ones that I mentioned here. So these are always at the end of the words. These are always endings that are complex endings, and these look like this rare one. So this is most likely a rare ending.
One of those. Yeah.
Right. And I always look at the history of... so this is my main source when I translate, is I'm looking at Tunglan, and it searches all of these dictionaries, Irish dictionaries, and they do have reference sometimes to older Irish. You can also look up the root to the word, the suffix and the prefix. It's kind of an older site, and it's searching a lot. So the server takes a fair amount of time. So usually I'll have 4 or 5 up at one time to translate one sentence. I'll put each word in to make sure I'm on the right track. And it doesn't take forever. But yeah, searching one thing tends to take a fair amount of time. And so let's get into some of the translations. How are we on time?
Yeah,
Sorry.
let's definitely... No, this would be the perfect time. Let's spend at least 15 or 20 minutes on that.
Okay. So this is looking at 1V. And this is a no frills translation. So I went word by word using my cipher. So this is FRCHIN. FRCHIN RADHOIL. AFADA. AFADA. Both of these together, AFADA. IN or AN THUIN. So that's exactly how I went about doing it. This is a common word. This is RON, or on occasion, the R, depending on the angle, is an M. So let's look at what that looks like. So this is the FH and the BH sometimes sound the same. So you'll sometimes see FH and BH interspace. So this is a very straightforward translation. Frikin, Odoi, Afada, translates to strongly how. And all of the definitions are I just will paste them. So I usually work with a VS Code just so I have a remote and local version of everything, and every single thing that I push up to that remote repository is secured in case anything happens to my computer, but I moved everything over to this Pages just so it's a little bit clearer. But these are all the words, and these are exactly as they're written using my cipher with the Irish determination. And so my translation of this first page, let's see them next to each other. And let's see if it corresponds with the image at all. So strongly how changing virgin frond, mindful hands or gives, again, a plain ripening its tube, in a manner 2, 3, then 3, strongly unfurl third. Your warbling, burning fire while enclosed. Ruler captive, ache subsided, unlucky climbing plant, overly creeping, straggling, half wild, plain, ebb, caught, alas, matter. Matter is a type of plant. Alas, matter, double vine, pressed smooth 3. Says to the devil, ominous figure, this occasion stresses, if you see any dashes like that, this is an uncertain word. This occasion stresses 2 matters, stresses 2 paths. Of brow below, the tail says stay, says weakness, little path, says secondly. Raven shouting, says allow it, held captive by misfortune. Interfere repeatedly, womanly misfortune, pitiful matron, your little path. So if you look up what a matter is a type of ivy plant. And a frond is a plant as well. So we can look at what is a matter. This is the scientific description of a matter. So if we look at so this is it looks pretty similar, no? Looks pretty similar to me. Well, this is when I was like, oh my gosh. I get so excited. But yeah.
Well, and it kind of, like you're saying, there's like a poetic element to it, and even the pages, like, that looks more diagrammatic than it does like a story. Like, there's some pages that look like a story, like a very long, properly formatted story is being told. But with a lot of these diagrams, the notes, even how they're translated, they kind of sound like notes that you'd read on a page. And there could also easily be some like allegorical significance, like understanding what they were saying and what that would have meant had you understood that language natively. There could have been some like deeper significance with any of this stuff, but it's go ahead.
I think that a person who knows Irish, and specifically the phonetics, would be the ideal person to translate this, especially Irish women and trans people that are interested in this. This is a great text because it's a lot about it's spiritual, but it's also, there's so many themes of gender and womanly experience, and and just to also echo what you're saying about the allegorical nature of this, there's absolutely that, but we also do get these moments of, oh, this visual corresponds with what we're looking at. So on 2R we also see that again. And secondly, I just want to add is that secondly, what I've determined to be secondly is the most common word that's used in this text. And it's basically DHOIL. But it's also similar potentially phonetically to the word for element and the word for I think darling. So there could be variation there, but there is a common theme of 2 and 3s in this text. And the idea of secondly, the way that I determine that is because it has the prefix for 2 and then the suffix for likeness of. So that would be secondly or second one.
Yeah.
So that's sort of this idea of a little path of there being 3 branches of something shows up again in 2R and throughout the text. So let's look at my translation really quick for 2R. Secondly, or second one. Self, the inner, secondly, regretfully. What changed intellectual young brown raven, reluctant? You third raven, excessively fortunate third path, prosperously fit, distressed in heat, protected third, early feeling it refract from you secondly, my 3-pronged spear, and this is a repeated word, it's the word for trident in Irish. This makes an appearance twice here and again later on as well. Refract from you secondly, my 3-pronged spear, and we have a 3-pronged spear here. Enters twice, pup dually from past dog, reliably inferior third. Combat sorrow from end to end, immune my 3-pronged spear. And again, we have this 3-pronged spear. I was like, oh. And this is the transcription of the literal Irish. And just to note, some of these M's are R's, but I just keep them as M's in case. The only event that the M's are R's are usually when they're standalone or in shorter words, and you'll see a difference slightly in the curves of the tails. But some, just to give you a heads up, some of these MHs are R's. But yeah, and then anything with a cross in it is just an O fada, is just a fada.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the corresponding words. So let's look back here. Oh, and then just to show you examples of other moments where it's said that there's a different language, but there's not actually. So this is all the herbal section, but let's just look at really quickly at the astrological section. Here, you may remember that I was talking about Lisa Fagan mentioning that this might be a constellation. This means spinner above, like a game spinner, like a toy spinner, and that's what we kind of see. It looks like a spinner. It says spinner above right here. Let me give you another example that's also literal. On the Wikipedia, actually, there's a, what was that, 66R? There's a little guy, they call him a little guy, on 66R. And 66R has a bunch of repetitions in it, and it's sort of like a break between these two sections. And also just take note for later, the vertical lines here this is kind of interesting, and so are these words here. This is just interesting for manuscripts. It's a little bit unconventional. But if you notice, there's a little guy down here just hanging out. And there's this on the Wikipedia, it says that this is a German saying for the widow's take, or something about a widow taking all or something. And when translated, it actually means a fiery wheel, refining a fiery wheel. And we have wheels, and wheels are also referencing earlier on. So let's look up Control. Wheel is mentioned so many times, 4 times before 160. So the little guy in 66R, it's refiner, fiery, small wheel, but I sort of intuited that it's probably purifying small wheel capable of growing fire. The fiery part, the actual translation is capable of growing fire, but this purifying, I'm just guessing. But these are the words as they're translated. Which is exactly what it looks like. It's a wheel. So, and then to show you where wheels are also mentioned, at the end part of 2R. So I wasn't going to open this up, but here we are. So the translation for 2V is occasionally restraining dislike towards both Jove's sons. There's a reference of Jove, which makes sense in terms of who I think the author might be, which I'll get into a little later. Occasionally restraining dislike towards both Jove's sons in order to harvest kern, which is like a mortar and pestle. Captive rotary press, noble being, small wheel, soul secondly. Captive remnants of last year's turf. In short time, April says, little path anchor, due secondly. Captive servant squirms, cries, frond raven. And the raven is just a descriptor for these fronds, these like ivy fronds. Secondly, fussing as an offering, says secondly. A gift, says hand. Most noble, small wheel. Secondly, redivide your highness. Secondly, little wheel, cycling, warbling, makes a loop, rounded summit. My subsidiary hand in front of my whirling giddiness, dizziness. So much talk of cycles and wheels and rotors. Rotor here on 3R, it says, your rotor spell says to submit. Trustworthy, says flames. Or trustworthy, says flame. Ruins, amen. Orion says, secondly, thrice. Remember, noble king with redden, says, counterattack. If arrived, changed real, which I interpreted as, if so, it becomes real. Change, repeat. Change, rearrange, repeat. This is also repeated in several different places, also especially in the natal section, the idea of changing, rearranging, and repeating. Well-grounded, declare strength direct. The noble raven says, the straying darkness bird, embroider, repeat them twice, improbable martyr. And let's look at 3R because it's again associated with the visual. So we have red here, and it goes back and forth. It alternates between green and red, green and red, green and red, which would make sense for the translation here. Your rotor spell says to submit here. Remember, noble king with redden says, counterattack. If so, it becomes real. Change, rearrange, repeat. So
Well, and
they're symbolic. Yeah.
I've got a couple of thoughts here for sure. So some of the people that studied this text were like noted alchemists, and definitely just understanding the overview and the different sections, it already seems like some kind of medieval tome of alchemical knowledge. And within alchemy or any of these like esoteric interpretations of this, there's a couple things that pop out to me. First, we had talked about this the other day, but solve et coagula, which is a Latin phrase that means dissolve and congeal. It's a principle that is widely discussed in a lot of these texts, and it's symbolic of death and rebirth, taking form, then returning back to essence, then taking form again. That's like a concept that is expanded upon by many people over a long period of time, and it means just that. So
totally,
there's that one phrase in there, the something repeat, rearrange, repeat. Like that's immediately what I think of there. This book also, there's a lot of mention about fertility, which is another concept that isn't just inclusive of like human fertility, the fertility of life in general, the fertility of the planet, the cyclical nature of the systems on the planet, the stars ahead in the universe. So the wheel imagery too, even 2 and 3, a common thing in like alchemical thought is the concept of dualism, positive and negative. And then of course, 3 has significance religiously and numerologically, but 3 usually refers to like the Trinity, and even before Christianity and the big 3 religions, there's like this triune nature of the divine that existed even before it's formally structured into the stories of the big 3 religions. But the other one too is, and I didn't even really think about this until we were talking about it, the idea in alchemy, there's a concept that gender itself is kind of fluid. Everything has masculine and feminine qualities, and it's just a matter of degree. It exists on a spectrum. So this book, talking about all these different things that can be traced back to esoteric or alchemical points of conversation, is just very interesting. It also makes sense as to why so many mystics of the contemporary and post this book being written were into it and found some kind of value in it. And I think, so the next question is, the person who wrote this book would have to have an in-depth knowledge of all of those things. And moreover, in a time where many people didn't read and write, they would have to be able to write these concepts in a way that could be understood literally, but then probably encode other stuff subliminally or allegorically. It would be more than just a simple understanding of the written word, especially at that time when, again, most people did not read or write. It was relegated to a specific class or caste of people that would have even been able to come up with these ideas, much less put them down into a book. And we had also talked too about, the more we're looking at it now, this book being some kind of like rough draft. This doesn't look like a finished thing. This looks like them putting together what would be assembled as a very fancy medieval tome, but it just never made it to that point. So I guess, now might be a good spot to kind of talk about who you think is responsible for this and the justification as to how they could have been responsible for this.
Absolutely. So the second stop that I made was the who. So there's, the who, the how, the what, the why. And the who was shortly followed for me from the what. So I wanted to figure out, because I usually take a very, human-based approach. I really wanted to understand, what was this author wanting to communicate? What was the author like? Why was the author writing this manuscript? what was their life like? What was their background like? So I tried to figure out who wrote this, and I actually sort of fell into a similar trap that many people do when they're looking at the Voynich, is looking at predominantly, men. And so I was looking at Irish men that could have been theologians or physicians, because this text is visually very similar to a lot of the medicinal texts from physician schools. Even in Italy, in Venice, there's a physician school where a lot of the medicinal texts look very similar to this. And so I was looking at a bunch of different, I went down so many different wrong paths in terms of the who, and I was convinced that I could figure it out also just from the change of hands of the manuscript. So there was a period of time where I was at the library just like printing out auction records and like trying to figure out what it could be like. And I was looking into like poetry, what people were buying and selling poetry, if it could lead me back to where it was prior to arriving in Prague. So I was just kind of all over the place, but I started looking into Irish people in Italy that were either physicians, theologians, religious people, priests, etc. And I came across a couple of different people, John of Ireland, John of Burgundy, or the Duke of Burgundy. I was looking at all of these different people, and in my research, I think there was some relation to an author that I had previously read and known a bunch about, just personally. So in 2019, I was reading a bunch of feminist authors, and I posted to my Instagram this painting I made that was like a cartoonish depiction of a woman, and I posted it along with a quote of an author named Christine de Pizan, and she was very vocal during the time about feminism and about how women were depicted by men, and I remember that she was from ancient. She was from like long ago, but I couldn't remember what year. And I remember seeing her come up in my research. I'm not sure if that's what brought me to her, or if I just remembered. I wonder if she could be connected. But I just started looking up Christine de Pizan because I had posted her, and I remembered that she existed in the 1300s, 1400s time period. And I looked it up, and her timeline fits perfectly with the carbon dating of the Voynich Manuscript. So I started to look into her background. Her father was a physician. Her father was also an astrologer that was appointed by the king. She was very, very well educated from her father. Her father made sure that she was extremely well educated. She was a polyglot. She was very interested in language. She spoke Latin. She spoke French. She spoke Italian. And as I was going down this, I was like, this is promising.
Yeah.
And this is still speculative, though. I do want to stress that. I think I put on my TikTok, I have proof, and I do have proof for myself, but it's still technically speculative. But she her history is super long and complicated, and she did so much in her lifetime. So she was born in Italy. She was originally born Cristina de Piziano or Piazzano. She was born in Italy, and then she moved to France when she was very young, and became Christine de Pizan. And her mother. So this is sort of, I was like, how would she have known this Cisalpine Celtic? And so I was like, what was her mother up to? What was her mother like? And there's so little information about her mother, so little information. So I was like, okay, what is the deal there? So it's said that her mother was part of a royal family, the Medino family in the Venetian territory of Italy. And I started to think, if she was royalty, why is there so little information about her maternal line? And it began to read to me as a little bit suspicious that there was so little information on her mom, especially because she ended up taking care of her mom later in life. So that lack of information was a little bit confusing, and I wondered, maybe she was Gaulish and it was kept secret for, whatever reason. And then I looked up geographically, and the Venetian territory is literally right next to where there were minorities, Gaulish speaking Cisalpine Celtic. So proximity wise, it isn't unheard of that she could have used this as a language in order to be cryptic. Christine de Pizan wrote so much in her lifetime, and she would write purposefully in vernacular French to reach a wider audience. And she had spoken previously about writing cryptically. So I was like, this is adding up. To give you an overview of her life, I definitely recommend looking into her history more, because I won't be able to cover everything. But when she had a husband, she had 3 kids. One of her boys died during infancy. One of her daughters grew up to be a nun and living in France. And when she was married to a man who ended up passing away around the same time that her father passed away. And so she wrote prior, but she wasn't hired or commissioned to write until after her husband and her father died. Her husband and her father left a fair amount unsettled when they died. So she had to basically take care of everything, take care of finances, and she ended up getting commissioned by the royal court to write. And she was writing for several different people. And she was writing a lot of romance, a lot of like chivalrous texts. And she wrote a story called The Book of the City of Ladies. And this came out around the same time period where it would really make sense for the carbon dating of the cipher manuscript. And one of the things that came up after reading The Book of the City of Ladies, I wonder if it could have been a sort of like prologue to The Book of the City of Ladies, just given all of these pregnant women sort of procreating without, there's not really men in this manuscript. It's really a bunch of pregnant women. So the idea of creation and life and all of that. So I wondered if possibly this could have been like a creative secret prologue to the Book of the City of Ladies. Just to give you also a background, she advised kings, she advised princes. She was very vocal and outspoken. She critiqued several male authors for depicting women in incorrect ways, and she was like very vocal in terms of male writers, but everyone really respected her. And in
a time where women were not respected at all.
Yeah. And she was a huge fan of Joan of Arc. And she passed away after Joan of Arc had been captured and before Joan of Arc had been burned at the stake. And she wrote a poem dedicated to Joan of Arc, one theory that I have is this might be an epilogue to that poem, because she talks about the poem to Joan of Arc. She talks about wanting to write more to it, but not wanting to give that to the audience and to leave it short and sweet. And she considered it sort of like a magnum opus for Joan of Arc. I can pull up that poem. I have this little folder called Proof. So it's my version of Proof, but this is the Joan of Arc excerpt. What an honor for the female sex, God's love, for it appears quite clear, because the kingdom laid to waste by all those wretched people now stands safe, a woman recused it. 100,000 men could not do that, and killed the hostile foe, a thing beyond belief before. While riding France of enemies, retaking town and castle both, no force was quite so strong, if hundreds or if thousands strong. Among our men so brave and apt, she's captain over all. Such strength no Hector or Achilles had. All this God does, who's guiding her. So she was a big fan. I think Joan of Arc was a kid. She was I think 17 or 18 when she was prophesized to, save the country, so to speak. And it's just that whole history is kind of bizarre to me. I definitely recommend looking into it.
Well, it's very unique. It's very unique, and in the example of who would have had in that time period, in that location, who would have had all that knowledge and the ability to, even as a rough draft, put something together like this.
Right.
I mean, she definitely checks a lot of those boxes. And again, pretty confirmed, like a woman being the scribe to a king, that is unheard of in those times. So clearly she was respected and would have had the knowledge base and experience to put something together like this. And, I didn't even think about it. I thought the more you were talking about her mother's line being connected to Ireland or Irish, I thought it was maybe like an homage to her mother or like her mother's side. But then the fact that this wasn't a widely spoken language, it's the perfect cipher. There's the perfect code. You write this book in this code and no one can plagiarize you before you have the ability to publish it in whatever language.
Right. And there's an element to this that seems relatively personal. And if it is connected to Christine de Pizan, we can see connections in terms of her previous work. She dealt with a lot of death in her life. Her son died in infancy. Her husband died, who she loved, who she greatly adored. I imagine her husband was probably like a golden retriever, what we say, like the golden retriever type. But she adored her husband, and her father gave her so much in terms of knowledge. And he was like I said, he was a physician and astrologer. And it does seem like, a lot of her work was around death and sort of otherworldly ideas. So this is just some visuals for you to see in terms of this is not her handwriting. She had scribes and she had artists. So this isn't her art or her physical handwriting, but just to give you an idea of what decisions were made artistically for her work. Very similar to the manuscript in a lot of ways. Look at the vertical lines here. This is from Christine de Pizan's work.
Yep.
The lines, yep. Or the vertical letters. This is just to compare sort of the tiling is also something in terms of patterns that you see in the Voynich. This is similar. The shape of the face. These were the faces. This was the art that Christine de Pizan saw and these were the artists that she worked with. And this looks pretty similar to, if we look up a close-up of the face, the faces are kind of similar in shape, but that was pretty standard for manuscripts.
Sure.
But there are
that
small little
art
moments.
Style. Yeah.
There's small little moments that I think are really similar. Look at these stars. The stars are a huge part of it. And if we look, the wheel is a huge part of Christine de Pizan's work. I compared the numbers. I'm not sure if she wrote those numbers, but they were super similar. And this is another example of the vertical lettering on the side. The idea of wheels make an appearance in Christine de Pizan's work as well. And like I showed you before on 2V and 2R, and also 66R, and also throughout, wheels and the idea of a little wheel makes an appearance. In terms of like life and death, we have like what looks like death, sort of the cycling that we also saw.
Yeah.
The rejuvenation. Rejuvenation is also a word that repeats itself that I didn't touch on, but just to keep in mind. So there's a lot of similarities, a lot to compare. There's these patterns too in the astrological section. This floor pattern that I noticed as well. Where are the rest of the stars? Okay. And then just to look at the stars here, doesn't that remind you of the stars that we see in the manuscript?
Yeah.
So this is Christine de Pizan's City of Ciudad, I think. And then if we look at the stars over here, kind of similar idea.
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah,
well, this is all super interesting, and again, like
just speculation.
Thinking back to the rarity, you have to understand contextually. Very few people in that time would have possessed this knowledge base, even amongst educated elites. This would have been strictly reserved for like priest class and above, alchemists, like people who were studying science before religion would allow for the study of science. Somebody having access to all that knowledge is not a coincidence. That's a very rare and unique thing. The fact that she's also a respected and accomplished writer who touches on a lot of these subjects throughout her works. I mean, that's pretty strong suggestions here. And again, the time frame matches up. Time frame and geographic locale, she checks those boxes too. So
exactly.
I guess the question is, go ahead.
I was just going to say the
No, go ahead.
The speculation from Yale researchers and researchers around is that there were 2 to 5 scribes for the Voynich Manuscript. I disagree with this, but in the event that there were scribes, Christine de Pizan had scribes that she worked with regularly and probably made rough drafts with. And she would be, one of the rare people to have multiple scribes. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Access to all the variables. No, I mean, that's
exactly.
It continues to make the point. Who would have had the access to the knowledge and all the additional variables that have been accounted for up until this point? She kind of checks the boxes. So like you've got this idea of who may have written it. You're kind of cracking the code. Obviously, this is an incredibly tedious process. It's not something you can just churn out. What is next? Like where do you want to take this? And like, what is your hope for not only advancing your decoding of this thing, but like the bigger thing that it means for people having possibly decoded this thing?
Right. So I am just really thrilled to have gotten somewhere with this, and it's been such an exciting, like, personal process for me. And I'm still have so much work to do. I have, upwards of 65 pages transcribed, and I still have probably between a third and 2/3 left to fully translate. I love this process and this work, and I've said on my TikTok before that translation begins as a communal process, and that's because you're working with an author who is no longer with us, and it requires a lot of respect and diligence and
reverence.
Reverence, exactly. And that being said, there are structures right now in the way the world is, and the way the country is currently, that I really do believe that this text begs to be translated with not just one person, but multiple people, and people that speak Irish and can hear the phonetics better than I can, especially women and trans people who are writers. This text is begging is calling to you. Whether you hear it or not, it is calling to you. I think translation is definitely a communal experience, and a lot of this type of knowledge and this type of practice is behind closed doors. And I just want to say that I had sort of the door closed on me a couple of different times in this process. I reached out to a scholar. I talked to a rare books person. I talked to Lisa Fagan. She was too busy to look at my work, which I totally understand, and she probably gets a ton of emails like mine. But a lot of this is available to the public, but there is an element of walled and gated in terms of institutions. I grew up in New Haven. I was, I could hardly afford school lunch. I was low income. So many people in New Haven so many kids in New Haven can't afford school lunch. And the majority of New Haven are people of color. And Yale sits right in the center. And the majority of people at Yale are white private school students, upper class, very well educated professors on the doctorate level. So it's a very interesting dynamic to grow up in, and there are aspects of where we're at right now in terms of Elon Musk deciding that Mars is the next best bet, and mathematically in terms of the preservation of a species or whatever, that might be true, but for a species that's healthy, and I don't think we collectively are that healthy right now, and there's so much that we have to learn and to grow and together collectively. And Elon Musk's behavior is sanctioned in part by everyone who embodies that sort of behavior, and that can look like hierarchy to a level that's personal superiority, supremacy. It's tied to white supremacy, colonization, and so we may see, like, collectively Elon Musk behaving in a certain way. It seems absurd, but many people embody those same behaviors on a smaller scale in the day-to-day. And so I just tend to think about that, and how our priorities should not be on, colonizing and potentially destroying another planet, but rather to focus on coming together, finding knowledge and enlightenment and hope and care for everyone, and not gatekeep and dominate others. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think generally in society, we're seeing like a push toward things being the desire, even by the generic public, for things to be open source. And in some cases, that's literally have code be open source. And in other ways, it's metaphorical. Just things be a little more transparent, the analysis and research of stuff not occurring in a complete bubble.
Vacuum, yeah.
And definitely, it definitely makes sense. There's a couple notes I want to make here. You having the software engineer background, the tech background, in my opinion, kind of predisposes you to pick apart languages differently than most general people, just because of not only your personal passion for translation of known languages, but coding languages, and being familiar with the structure of a language, whatever that is. And it's also no coincidence that most of the people that I know who are coders, software engineers, almost all of those people want everything to be open source, and it's for the same reasons. We get more accomplished done when there's more people working on it. The more compartmentalized this stuff is, the more in a bubble it gets put into, the less people just by design you have looking at it, and that's rarely a good thing. Now, of course, there are extreme examples. Do I think all nuclear secrets should be open source? No. But there's a ton of science that is probably classified now that should be, we would be advancing it far more to the benefit of everyone if more people were just had the ability or access. The internet has given us some great tools, but like you're saying, there still are places where this stuff is gatekept. But, again, that's why I like what you do. That's why I've always been kind of drawn to the content you put together, is because the ethos, the ethics are there. And definitely the coming from a human perspective, I think it's so easy for a lot of people to just get lost in, well, AI will figure it out. Oh, well, the computer will figure it out. And in a lot of cases, the computer's only as good as the people, and the people aren't that good. So what we need is just more people, objectively picking apart these mysteries of history, these mysteries of literature, these mysteries of our past that were decidedly made by humans in a human way. So I don't know. I keep doing what you're doing, keep putting this stuff out there. To me, it really, like, you have made this text make more sense to me than it has ever made to me in what I have read about it. And again, it's like practical, very reasonable, time appropriate estimations of what could be happening here. Yeah. And again, like I was talking before about the alchemical stuff, there's like so many concepts in alchemy that it's part science, it's part medicine, it's part elemental. There's parts that are even like psychological. And it's another kind of thing. Even we were talking about this on the other podcast. These ancient cultures, these people from rudimentary times that we think were so unintelligent or uninitiated, they were highly initiated. They knew a lot of the science that we're currently discussing today. They just didn't necessarily have the means to quantify it that we do now. And even just as we're talking about what this manuscript is, it's just immediately reminiscent of the alchemical view of the world, that there's some kind of interrelation, everything is moving cyclically, and that's inherent to all people, all cultures. All cultures through history have had these same concepts baked into their stories, but obviously with different words and examples in many cases. But
definitely. And
yeah, it's super cool. This is super exciting.
I just wanted to quickly add, what you just said made light bulbs in my head. But so if you look at this is a huge publication, and it is so in depth, and a lot of people worked on it. There's an element that is a little bit rigid to some of the approach, and I want to just take note of that rigidity, because we're in a time right now where the arts are not being funded and education is not being funded. And I just want to really, really stress that, yes, I have a software engineering background, and it has allowed me to interpret and understand things in a new way, to understand conditionals. Also, conditionals are a huge part about the process. However, I entered this text and I looked at this text with my eyes from an artistic, creative kind of perspective initially, and I just really want to stress that the arts and creativity are so important in terms of innovation, and should definitely be incorporated in more, rigid, so to speak, settings.
100%. 100%.
Like
again, the ancient cultures, the ancient cultures knew this. That's why there's stuff, and again, not just proto-Venetians, like all cultures understood art, emotion has to play into these stories. That's how you get the stories to take hold and last forever.
And sound.
That's why there's art in caves.
The blend, yeah, exactly.
That's why this is important.
You just reminded me. I also just wanted to stress that this is still speculative. I hope that Lisa Davis Fagan will listen to this podcast. But I also just wanted to say that, this is still speculative. If it's not accurate, if I'm not right, if I'm completely wrong, for me, it doesn't matter that much. If this encourages anyone to start learning Irish or continue the Irish language, which is a dwindling language, that would be just awesome. If this encourages you to look up Christine de Pizan and the history there, that's amazing.
That's also awesome.
This was such a this is currently and will continue to be such a rewarding experience. If this encourages you to look up another archaeological mystery or to learn more about yourself and the world and alchemy or plants or whatever interests you the most, that's amazing. That's what this is all about.
That's just as beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this has been incredible. Again, you've given me an insight into this thing that I have not had from a million YouTube videos and internet rabbit holes. Why don't you quickly tell people where to check out your content, and where they can keep up to date with any new developments that you have with this?
So you can find me on TikTok at blessedbutt, BLESST_BUTT. The same handle. I'm on YouTube. YouTube I haven't started up yet, but hopefully I'll be making some longer content soon. I also have a Substack with some of the translations published. And that's about it, I think.
Love it. I'll have all those links in the description below. Please check them out if you're interested by this, or even the whole Stonehenge rabbit hole. If you did not get onto that episode or any of that other content, your page is kind of just like an excellent repository for a humanistic approach and analysis to a lot of these mysteries from the past. But thank you so much for coming on and taking us down this rabbit hole. And I'm super excited to see what comes of this. To everybody else, this has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Be sure to check out the links in the description below. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll catch you on the next one. We'll see ya.
This has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. The end. With your host, James Oliva. Executive producers, Clint G and James Oliva.
That's obnoxious.
Sound design, mix, and master by James Oliva.
Literally no one cares.
For more Totally Legitimate Business, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Totally Legitimate Business, or add us on TikTok at TLB Pod.
When will this end?
Thank you for listening. Now get back to work.
Move it along.